Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our inaugural Bird Box debate. We're hoping to run 4 of these this year, and welcome to the very first Fundraising Nest Bird Box debate. And it's a hot topic today. Brave one, some might say, from from the Fundraising Nest. Is training actually worth it? And we are literally from Hobart to Honolulu today. And I would like to introduce, first of all, our debaters. We have Nigel Harris, very familiar face to many of you, who is literally on a boat in Honolulu. Nigel Harris is an established and highly regarded non-profit sector leader specialising in philanthropy and fundraising. With an outstanding track record in organisational growth and development, Nigel has crafted a unique range of experiences and insights in governance, executive leadership and applied fundraising practice. Nigel is the Managing Director of Nigel Harris and Associates, an advisory and consultancy practice specialising in philanthropy and fundraising leadership. He's also affiliated with agencies in the non-for-profit sector where he provides specialist advisory services. 40-year career, notably the Chief Executive Officer of Matter Foundation for 24 years. Remarkable career, Nigel. Nigel will be our pro-argument. And next we have Rebecca Skelly, a familiar face to many in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Rebecca is a fundraiser who's on a lifelong learning journey about our beautiful profession. Rebecca has been fundraising for many, many years across New Zealand, Australia, spent 5+ years in East Asia and Brazil. She loves individual giving work, especially regular giving, omni-channel appeals, digital fundraising and donor pipeline work, and she happy places writing practical strategies which are able to make a clear impact on fundraising programs. And she currently works as Rebecca.
Sorry, I couldn't turn mute off. Head of Philanthropy and Donor Development at Greenpeace East Asia.
Perfect. And we have Chanel Clapham, who is going to be Rebecca's going to be our gentle con, and in the middle we have Chanel Clapham, who is going to offer her thoughts on both arguments. Chanel is a no bull, no nonsense, no guts, no glory type who you want in your corner fighting for your fundraising campaigns. Chanel is who you call when you want to try something new, get a project off the ground, or do something different to what everyone else is doing. Chanel is who you call when you have steep targets and need a strategy that focuses on delivering actual donors and revenue and not just great engagement. Chanel has spent the last 15 years transforming digital experiences for many of the largest organisations across Australia, including WWF, Surf Lifesaving, Plunkett, Save the Children, and we all know she is the director of Parachute Digital. Thank you all for joining us today. I will just tell our audience what to expect from today, our debate. It's a bit more formal than normal. I've even put my jacket on. We are going to have opening introductions, maximum 10 minutes from our debaters to present their cases. We're going to go Nigel, Rebecca, and then Chanel. I will ring the bell when they've got 30 seconds, and I will end it if they don't use the 10 minutes. Following that, there will be a 4-minute rebuttal from each debater, who they can rebut whoever they choose to. And then I will just do a short summary while our debaters think about their rebuttals. We'll do a final 3-minute rebuttal, and then we will throw open to you, audience, for voting on this topic. Let's go. Is training really worth it? I am looking forward to this one, and we will start with Nigel Harris. Over to you, Nigel.
Thanks, Michelle. As I was reflecting on this question of is training really worth it, I began to really think about, well, actually, why do we need training in an occupation that has no formal or established pathway to the work that's undertaken? So one of the unique things about fundraising practice is there is no pathway into it. It's one of the few jobs or occupations you can move into without needing to know or have done or prepare yourself for anything. So why would we need training for that? Well, why would we need training in an occupation that often struggles to gain organisational buy-in around the need for fundamental knowledge or continuing education? I hear this lament from fundraising practitioners quite constantly that organisations don't support what we do. They don't invest in training. They don't understand the need for having knowledge, and getting that commitment from leadership is one of the most vexing and challenging questions, to say laments, that we hear. So again, why would we worry about training in that context? Why would we worry about training an occupation that is divided around what forms and informs professional identity? We have this challenge, I think, in fundraising practice, that whilst we might see ourselves in a particular way from inside out, we talk about being fundraising professionals, practitioners, but I'm not really sure that we've really lugged our wagons around this idea of what actually informs the notion of professional fundraising practice and the identity that goes with that. So once again, why would training be useful in that regard at all? Or an occupation that's inconsistent around what forms and informs practice itself and a body of knowledge in terms of what it is and how it's actually created. Again, I say that my observation, at least over the time I've been involved in fundraising practice, it's about 5 or 6 weeks or 40 years now, is that we don't get to an easy or comfortable level of consistency around what actually informs fundraising practice. I still see evidence of people's discovery around literature, around research, around different points of understanding. And so again, it begs this question of, well, why would we need training in that context? Or an occupation that actually calls itself a profession but isn't consistent in applying or even recognizing the criteria that frames a profession. So one of the challenges I see again in fundraising practice is that we do like to call ourselves a profession without what I would challengingly identify as wanting to put in the hard yards and actually frame a profession. So when we do that against other professions that do the work in whatever context, and identifying what actually frames a profession is not particularly difficult. It's a quick Google search, so it's not something that's unusual or particularly difficult to access. But once again, it seems to be a point of contest. So why would we need training in that context? And why, again, would we need training in occupation that will at times make things up? So the notion of MSU, making stuff up, is alive and well in fundraising practice, in some corners and nooks and crannies, or blindly accepting concepts and approaches rather than pursue constructive curiosity. So rather than actually inquire and pursue knowledge and information, we will often just accept what someone says. Again, why would we need training in occupation that serves social purpose in areas that impact and ultimately matter in people's lives? After all, perhaps that may not be important, but it's an area that is ultimately the reason that we're involved in fundraising. Or indeed, again, a question of why would we need training in occupation that carries responsibility for the informed investment of financial capital and the use of time. So we carry a lot of responsibility in fundraising practice for using money wisely. And I'm not going to get into the trope of using donor money. I think that one gets twisted and very contorted in many ways. But the idea that we do have a responsibility to use both money and time in a wise capacity, but after all, wouldn't warrant training to sit underneath that. Or similarly, would training be important in the context of our role as being the face of an organisation and cause that's represented when engaging donors and supporters? So often donors and supporters, the first people they experience and the folk they engage with most commonly are those in fundraising practice. So again, there seems to be perhaps a shallow argument that training is necessary in that context as well. Or again, an occupation that's responsible for positive and enduring donor relationships that extend beyond any individual moment in time. Again, how would we really see training benefiting that pursuit of responsibility? Or an occupation that commonly laments experiences where organisational leadership and colleagues don't take fundraising practice seriously or see it as a professional discipline. And once again, if we're happy to continue to take on those sorts of contests or challenges, then training perhaps has a dubious role in our occupational construct. Or an occupation that has a significant turnover problem, which can be attributed to, at least in part, inadequate preparation and support for the roles undertaken and unrealistic expectations around the nature and timing of results. So when we think about all those points, there's clearly no case for training being a necessary underpinning element of the occupation in which we occupy. After all, training is an indulgent, expensive exercise in occupations should just get on with the job and stop whinging about it, or not. Now, just to be clear, when we're talking about training, we can talk about a number of things here. So when we actually examine this question of training, what do we mean? Training that you do to equip you to do your job, so fundamental job skills and knowledge, the education that you undertake to prepare you for a vocational pathway and extend your capacity and capability in your vocation, the continuing professional education that you are obliged to undertake as part of professional obligations, and the pursuit of information and knowledge that's driven by curiosity and vocational responsibility. And again, when we talk about training, we recognise that it can be delivered in various ways, from presentations, seminars, conferences, sector-based courses, formal education, reading, accessing online content, and. So all of that brings us to what and why of training. So clearly, I'm painting a picture here that training actually is very, very important. But training for its own sake and undertaken without a focus or expectation of accountability can reasonably pose the question of why bother? And it's a fair question, because much of the training that I've observed over the years is potentially nebulous, and it's neither directed nor translated. It just happens. And it may not be based around identified needs of individuals or organisations and development of individuals and organisations and outcomes. So in this context, the question of why bother with training is fair. But this isn't actually the problem with training, for the most part at least. It's actually a matter for fundraising practitioners, organisational leaderships. That's where the training problem really lies. And perhaps the real challenge in our sector isn't whether we should or shouldn't embrace training. I see that answer actually as being quite self-evident. But let's see what the opposite position has to say about that to eliminate this further. But I'd argue the real issue is, and indeed the challenge around training in the sector, is to take a more complete, a more connected, a more continuous, a more curious approach, and arguably more mature approach to training. So the bigger question is not whether we should or shouldn't, but rather why and when and how we pursue a deliberate and continued approach to training, and what informs that approach, and our expectation of realisable returns for people, for organisations, and most importantly, the social purposes that we serve that are actually fundamentally underpinned by training.
Very impressive start, Nigel Harris. I will now hand over to Rebecca Skelly, who is going to be your gentle opposition. Good luck, Rebecca.
Thanks, Michelle. And thank you very much to Nigel for sharing his thoughts on this very interesting topic. As fundraisers, we want to do the best job we possibly can for our cause. Being the best is helped by shortening the learning curve and having our staff develop into effective fundraisers who are doing their best work for our cause. But much of the training that is undertaken is, unfortunately, worthless. Training can be fun and interesting, but unless it is providing a benefit to your fundraising program, then why are you doing it? In this opening speech, you'll see that there is really an improvement in key performance indicators after training, that organisations lack a strategic focus for their training, and that we need to be mindful of our ethical responsibilities to our donors' investment in our cause. Is random training the best way to spend donors' dollars? In surveys seen after training sessions, on average only 25% of organisations found that training improved employee performance. The key to the statement is that it was from an organisation's point of view. Almost all post-training surveys ask the participants whether their performance has benefited from the training, but hardly ever is an employer asked if the training has improved the performance of their employees. This is a really important point because it's the organisation that is paying for the training, both in terms of direct cost and staff time. It is also the organisation who is measuring the benefit of the training. Many training opportunities in fundraising are focused on specific skills. This could be things like storytelling, digital engagement, or grant writing. All of these things have measurable KPIs, and we would expect an improvement to these KPIs after specific training has been delivered. In my experience, it is very rare that improvements to KPIs are seen any time after a training session. It is more likely that the fundraiser improves their performance through on-the-job coaching and mentoring. Training offers some benefit to staff retention and upskilling, but so much of it is not beneficial to the organisation paying for the training, with the purpose of improving the results of their fundraising. My second point is that often there is no strategic focus to training. We are not training employees in the skills most critical to the organisation's stage of development. Too often, the wrong people are being sent to the training and too little time is spent on implementing what has been learnt. Useful training offers a practical skill critical to the fundraising program in its current stage of development. It should be essential to the job you have to perform in the next 6 months, not the next 3 years. Otherwise, it will soon be forgotten or will get employees spinning in the wrong direction. Many organisations send employees on training courses for staff retention purposes or because there's a budget line for staff development. This is neither strategic or beneficial to the fundraising program. Organisations must first have a clear strategy and execution plan in place for training. In my experience, most organisations do not plan in advance for training and instead take advantage of opportunities as they come along. Training without implementation is just an intellectual journey. And most of us would rather go to the movies or read a great book. At the end of the day, the question to ask yourself is, will the training change the way we do stuff around here? If not, don't waste your time and money. Take your team to the movies instead. Sure, as employers, we want our staff to be happy, and training and development is one way to increase staff happiness. But we're also in the game of fundraising, and oftentimes we're using donors' money to do this training. Therefore, we have an ethical duty to ensure that the outcome of the training leads to better fundraising outcomes and more donations for the charity. When a donor looks for impact, they want to see not only that their donation is making a difference for the mission of the cause, but that we are spending it wisely. If we can show that spending $1,000 or more on a training course will increase, for example, our direct-to-web donations by an extra 10%, then this is definitely worth it. Depending on the volume of the organisation is already getting through web donations, this could be a return of 1.5 or more, but you need to be able to measure this. How many of us here can say that their organisation strategically plans for training, that the right people attend at the right time for the stage of fundraising that you're at? How many can say that they have seen an improvement in KPIs post-training sessions? If, like me, you enjoy going to training and learning new things, do yourself and your organisation a favour and start to question what you are doing and why. How will this training improve specific KPIs? Will my team actually make operational changes to their work as a result of this training? If you can't answer the above or they are in the negative, then we need to rethink training. How do we actually make it worthwhile? How do we justify spending donor dollars on training? Thank you.
Excellent.
Well, I wish I was in this debate. I'm sitting there going, I want to reply. Okay, Rebecca, very well presented. Chanel, we are now going to throw over to you and let's see where you can find a space in the middle. I'm sure you have some thoughts on both of these. Over to you, Chanel.
Yeah, my Rebecca definitely had me both Nigel and Rebecca had me kind of going, I want to shift what I was going to say. But so I'm just going to wing it. I'm going to see where it goes. So I'm a bit of a fence sitter on this. Like Rebecca, I used to run training, and I'm not jaded by the running of the training. I think that when you're in the room doing training feels totally worth it. But after you leave that room, I do question whether there is a lot of value in it. So my answer to is training worth it for fundraisers is yes, but. So, yes, but it needs to be ongoing and practical. Yes, but the person doing the training needs to be self-motivated and needs to want to do it and needs to have asked to do it and needs to have a justification of how they're going to implement it later. Yes, but it only works if the person then has the opportunity to implement it, to practice what they've learned quickly, not 10 years later. So, like, I don't know if give us some metaphorical hands up if you're in the audience. How many of you have done a training course, like a one-day course or longer, and then you've never really used the skills afterwards? Mine would be PowerPoint, some things I've learned in Excel. It might be like I've been on some time management training courses that had really practical things, but there was no one there to make sure I was doing it. There was no one there to, enforce it. So I've done cultural training, which was fascinating and interesting. And I learned that I'm guilty of microaggressions when I thought that I was the least racist person possible, but that asking someone about their hair can be a microaggression, or asking someone what their cultural background. But I think a lot of us, we might learn one little thing, but do we actually implement it? And if we don't, and if it's not ongoing, if it's not something that we can use daily, then it doesn't often work. But if you're self-motivated and if you have a personal connection to this or a personal desire and ambition, then it will work. But it's a yes, but there's always a caveat. So I'm going to tell you my story about why I sit on the fence this way, because I came into the not-for-profit space after a decade in corporate and in media. And I was the first ever digital person at WWF Australia. But I didn't have any colleagues. Like, I didn't have any other people that knew digital. So there was so much of an education process that I had to do internally to try and bring people on this journey, to get them to invest in digital, to get them to see the benefits of it for fundraising for the organisation. So when I started Parachute Digital after my time at WWF, one of the first things I was like, there are no digital skills in this not-for-profit space. We need more digital skills. We need more training. So the first thing I did, like the first sort of product I created for the industry, was to do training courses, like full day, half day, email marketing courses, things that will have tangible, like 5 things you can do that will increase the money that you make off your email sends for an appeal. Things that you can do to drive money from Google search, like you get this $10,000 Google grant, but none of the charities seem to know how to use it. So it's just set and forget. Or you get a few charities that invest in a digital person, but they're doing too many things, so they can't do it. But what I learned in my first 2 years in business is that because of some of the things that Rebecca mentioned, that there's, we're spending on training just because there's a budget line or just because it's for staff retention, but the budgets are not commensurate with what it really takes to do this training. So, a charity might have a $400 budget for for each individual to do some training, and that's not even enough to do a one-day course. So, the minute the word training is included, that leadership don't value it. They don't invest in what it really takes for that training to be implemented. So I found that I could sell a $50,000 project to an organization easier than a $500 training course. So I totally believe more training is needed, but it needs to be in an ongoing setting. So what I learned from that and what I've changed is that we now don't offer training courses. We build as a pro bono offering into all of our projects, mentoring and capability building and capacity building for charities. So if we're doing a digital lead gen project, then we'll say, what do you guys need to learn? If you want to learn how to set up a Facebook advertising campaign, we will teach you. If you need to learn how to implement Google Analytics tracking so that you can do it, we will teach you. But it's done in a practical setting with a project so that you can use it. You can see the KPIs that are set as part of the project, and then you can measure it. You can use your new skills to constantly measure us and the performance that we're doing. But also we teach you how to do it, and then you have an opportunity to use it in a day-to-day or week-to-week ongoing capacity. So yes, training is beneficial, but only if you can use it in an ongoing and practical implementation setting. So and when I think back to training that I've done that I've used over and over again that has been really practical, when I was in high school and I was getting an allowance from my parents, my dad made me do a typing course. And it was like I wasn't allowed to get my allowance unless I did an hour a day of this typing course. You had to put a tea towel over it, and I had to learn to touch type. So I was like 13, 14 years old, but I had to do that every day. It was ongoing and it went for like 10 weeks. I didn't get my allowance, so I was motivated to do it. But I could touch type at high school, and I've been able to use that ever since in my career. The other training that I've done that I've used over and over is driving lessons. I was very motivated in that. I had a personal benefit to me. I did a PADI diving course, which I've used that training for the last 15 years because it's something I love and I'm passionate about. But I've also done training in leadership, and it's been inspiring and it's been interesting, but I've learned a lot more in my just managing people and in leading a business than I have from any course. I've done design thinking training, and what it taught me is I already use a lot of this stuff intuitively. I just didn't have the theory behind it, but I haven't then been able to implement many of those things. I did a 12-week course. I started my career in digital doing I had a boss that was really supportive. He wanted someone to just relaunch the website. I put my hand up and said, I'd be keen on learning that. I went off and did a 12-week digital marketing course in my own time at night. But he made the time for me every day after my course. So I'd do it on a Tuesday night for 3 hours. And he had put a meeting in my diary every Wednesday morning, and we would sit down and go, what did you learn last night and how are you going to implement it this week? But he gave me the time and the space and the opportunity to implement what I was learning by myself on my own terms. He let me guide it, and then he would sort of say, oh, why don't you try this or do that? It was in seconds. But I think that training is worth it, but only if it's ongoing, only if the person is personally motivated to do it, and only if the environment, that the organization, the manager gives them the opportunity to practice it and use it and implement it immediately and in an ongoing capacity.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. 3 very, very different opinions. Now, I don't need to do much talking because the way it's worked out, Nigel has had some time to listen, and I am going to throw it back to Nigel. We are going to start with our rebuttals, which are going to be very short, 4-minute rebuttals, please. Nigel, you can choose who to rebut and when, and we will go to the Chanel, then we'll go to Rebecca and then to Chanel. Nigel, over to you.
Yeah, look, thanks, Michelle. And look, thanks, Rebecca and Chanel, for agreeing with pretty much everything I've said. So I think that in the context of the rebuttals, it makes it very easy to really just affirm a theme that started to shape in my opening remarks, and just perhaps just highlight where that theme has been reinforced in both Rebecca and Chanel's comments, and emphasising, I think, that the pro-argument is definitely the argument. And really just to restate, it's not that training in as much as in and of itself is the issue, it's how the training is used. So here, Rebecca talked to the idea of organisations lacking focus, certainly very strongly made that point. The mindfulness around ethical responsibilities in terms of serving purpose and donors, and once again, that was an emphasis touched on as well. And certainly the best spend of, donor dollars investment here. Once again, that was a point that I recall emphasising very strongly. And I think it's jumping out of that is this focus on leadership being really critical in how training is framed and encouraged. I think that whilst we might accept that organisations in the main pay for training, that's not the case all the time. There are personal responsibilities around that as well. And but that might be true in the majority of cases, in which case there is absolutely an obligation on organisations to get the most out of that and to think strategically around this as well, which if may recall, I made the remarks around this being something that is to be more complete, more connected, more continuous, more curious, and more mature. I think that strategic emphasis is very much around that. So once again, thanks for emphasising that point. I think the notion of measurement and how we actually see some value being articulated through a continuing approach is important as well. And, your observations again, thinking about that notion of being on the fence, once more acknowledge the fact that very much was the points I was making, in the notion that this is really not so much around training itself, but how we see that being used and what its application might be from a individual and organisational perspective. One point you touched on was the self-motivation, and I think that's an important driver. But I do think there's a leadership responsibility here to lift people up and move them through learning processes as well. It won't always happen by osmosis. So I think that leadership responsibility in terms of how to help and guide and invest. Your points around the lack of leadership investment and understanding around training, again, is an important and overt point in that context, almost that clear reluctance to really see things past their very basic element of superficial investment and expectations of what will only be superficial return. So I think all of this really just emphasises the fact that training is terribly, terribly important in its various iterations, but ultimately the application of training and how it's articulated and how it's understood and how it's supported and how that investment plays out in that longer term strategic context.
Thank you very much. Rebecca, over to you for a rebuttal, please.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Nigel and Chanel as well. So I'm picking up on a few points that both Nigel and Chanel have said. One of them that Nigel mentioned in his speech was around staff turnover. There's no doubt at all that we have a high staff turnover in the fundraising world. But study after study shows that this is primarily due to management issues. Management, either the direct line manager or the way the organisation is run, is the primary reason that we have such a high turnover of staff, not so much to do with training. Yes, you did say there's many different types of education, Nigel, and said that we need a more mature and complete approach. I completely agree with you, and it was one of my points around being more strategic. But this is not happening, is my point. Organisations are not being strategic, they're not being mature about the way that they manage their training programs or their training opportunities for their staff. Finally, the last point I picked up on was you mentioned about blindly accepting established processes. processes that are built on experience are not always wrong. And if people coming in and changing those processes without having a complete picture, they might have done one training course and think they know better, is not necessarily going to be good for the organisation. Chanel had many caveats to her yes, as we heard. And one thing that I thought was really pertinent was the fact that she said that she learned a lot more in work experience that she's ever done on training courses. And I think that goes to show for just about everyone. And that goes to my point around on-the-job coaching and mentoring is actually way more beneficial than many of the training courses that are available. She also mentioned that we need more digital skills in our industry, and I couldn't agree more. But has anyone tried to employ a digital fundraiser recently? They're not available. You need to go to the corporate sector and find someone who's got transferable skills in digital marketing. Digital fundraising skills are still not there. They have to be taught in-house and that sort of thing. I must say that your pro bono training sounds spot on. It's more like sprint training. You do a little bit and then you implement. You do a little bit, then you implement. This is a good way of doing training, but how many opportunities like that are out there? There just isn't the opportunities. It's not how training is delivered, and it's not how training is able to be done in many instances if you've got professional training organisations as well. That is my rebuttal.
Okay, Chanel, final 3 minutes for you, please.
I think Rebecca has sold me. In my opinion, she's won the debate. But the one thing I do want to rebut you on, Rebecca, is the investment, the ethical use of donors' money in training for fundraisers. Obviously, there's a big, there's been a big launch in Australia with off the back of this uncharitable movie where they're talking about we need to change how we talk about overheads. And that often training is used as a way to retain staff and as a way to improve the culture, like people are happier when they're doing training. I think that's a really good use of money, especially if we're talking about a measly $400 a person. If that'll retain someone, that's far more beneficial to fundraising, to the programs that we run, and loss of downtime. Like, we know that it pretty much costs a whole person's salary to replace someone. So if you're replacing a fundraiser on $75,000 a year, when they leave, the downtime and the change management of that person to a new one, and you often having to pay more for someone coming in again, that I think that's a good use of training budget. But that's not the point of, is the training good? I just think that that's a good use of training budget. And also using training to improve cultural growth mindsets and to improve staff happiness and well-being, I think is a good use. But whether or not, again, I'm gonna live my role of the fence sitter, whether or not is training worth it. But for me, if I could spend $400 or even $2,000 to retain a staff member that is good by sending them to a conference, to me, that is a worthwhile use of donor money. I did think that the leadership, the thing that's really swayed me with Rebecca's argument was that there is no strategic planning for training. Like, managers and leaders aren't going, okay, well, we're going to send Chanel on that leadership training because we want her to take over a different role next year. I think that happens 1% of the time, but most of the time it's happening where it's like, oh, I've got that budget, I want to spend it. So I think that the challenge is to leaders in the fundraising space and in the not-for-profit space to sit down at the start of the year with their team and say, and co-design it. What are we going to do together to make this worthwhile so that we can implement it.
Okay, I am going to do a wrap up. And when I finish my wrap up, I'm going to offer everyone 60 seconds to present why their argument is right. I have listened to you all, and it was a very brave decision for me to do this as our first debate, given the premise of the fundraising nest. I have thoughts on all of it. I believe that the more knowledge and understanding that we have of our world and what we do is just makes us well-rounded, better human beings. I think fundraisers are under enough pressure to reach KPI targets without having to go on a training course to expand their mind to then prove that that was worth it in a KPI financial kind of result. I also believe that the training out there, going to a conference once a year, is not going to make you a better fundraiser. It has to be embedded across all different levels. But fundamentally, training and knowledge and experience, we are the knowledge keepers. You three are mavens of the fundraising nest. The mavens have over 450 years experience between them. And these are the people who are able to deliver results. How did you get to where you were? Through learning, through experience, through peer-to-peer connection, through training and education. I have loved listening to you all, and I hope you will now round us off with a final 60 seconds. We're going to go straight to Nigel. Nigel, sell it to us for 60 seconds.
I'm just going to restate what I said in my opening remarks, and that is the question's really not about whether training is valid. The problem is really one in terms of our sector and practitioners and leadership. So the challenge lies there. Again, I argue the issue is really a challenge around training being more complete, more connected, more continuous, more curious, and more mature in the way it's used, and that is a leadership responsibility. So the bigger question is not whether we should or we shouldn't train, but rather why, when, how, and we pursue a deliberate, continuing approach to training, what informs that approach, and our expectations of return for people and organisations, including leadership and social outcomes, which addresses all of the points that Rebecca and Janelle have made so well, and I think that's why they absolutely support the argument that I've put.
Rebecca, over to you. 60 seconds now.
It's the way training is delivered and managed is not working. The hill to change this is really steep, and I'm not sure that it can be done. There's established processes, there's established systems in place for training, and it's not just fundraisers who are delivering it. There's all sorts of organisations who are. But for the majority of it, it's just not working. And KPIs are important. It's not about every single little training thing needs to have a direct KPI. But if you're doing years worth of training and not seeing any blimmin' difference to your bottom line in the way that your fundraising is delivered, why the hell are you doing it?
Janelle, over to you.
I'm going to close out by using some of the words that both Nigel and Rebecca have used. Yes, training is a nebulous, indulgent exercise that is really just supporting people on an intellectual journey. So I think it needs to be on-the-job training and coaching that you will learn in an ongoing place where you can implement it.
Thank you all very much. Now, I know Lachlan is behind the scenes working out our feedback from our audience. I just want to thank you all again. These are the conversations that absolutely have to be had. And as far as I'm concerned, you are all winners. I think we are naturally all on the same page. We exist in the sector because we care so passionately. We want to see improvements. And I think it was a healthy, robust debate, but I think ultimately we're all pretty much on the same page. We're passionate about making sure that leaders invest in their people, but that actually both of those things are, all of you, in my opinion, gave a wonderful debate. And I think these are absolutely the kind of sessions that people need to be thinking about and looking at, being curious and understanding the benefits of training. Okay, I'm just hearing from Lachlan. We do have a winner. I think this person presented themselves very, very well. I'm not sure this was how I wanted the first debate to turn out, but the winner of the inaugural debate is Rebecca Skelly.
Thank you, and
congratulations, Rebecca. I think your delivery won, but you were absolutely right. I think your passion about being able to, I know you're passionate about your people being given the right opportunities to train, and I think that's exactly what Nigel is saying too. If the leadership understood the importance and the long-term benefits of training, I think I think when they only give small budgets and they only get to go to one thing a year, seeing the impact of that is naturally difficult. So it's understanding the bigger investment that will create the impact that you're all looking for. And I think that is the campaign that, and Nigel is well versed in leadership, and that's where a lot of his work is around boards and strategic thinking. And I think we all want to see much more investment in professional development that creates real impact for organisations. I want to thank you all so much for coming to our debate today. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and this will be available on demand. If you're watching it on demand, thank you very much, and we will be back. We've got 3 more debates we're going to do 4 this year. We're looking for our community suggestions of topics. What do you want to hear debated? And we will hear from you next time. But until then, thank you very much. Goodbye.